It always starts the same way: a quiet house, a sleeping baby, and a cat watching from the corner. People laugh when they hear it. Cats don't steal a baby's breath, they say. It sounds like something out of an old horror story, something your grandparents might whisper to scare you into behaving. But then you start reading the stories. Not legends, not fiction, but real people sharing real experiences late at night on forums, in comments, in places where people don't usually lie. And suddenly, the idea doesn't feel so ridiculous anymore. Because when enough people describe the same strange feeling, the same uneasy moment, the same cold realization in the middle of the night, you start to wonder if something deeper is going on. Not something supernatural, but something real, something misunderstood, something that turned into a myth because no one wanted to face what actually happened. For generations, people have passed down the same warning: never leave a cat alone with a baby. Not because the cat is aggressive, not because it might scratch or bite, but because, as they say, it might steal the baby's breath. The phrase itself sounds almost poetic, almost ancient, like something born in a time when people didn't have answers. And maybe that's exactly where it came from. A time when a baby could go to sleep healthy and never wake up, and no one knew why. A time when people needed something, anything, to blame. And sometimes, in the quiet of a room, there was a cat nearby, watching, sitting, existing, and that was enough. One woman wrote about how her grandmother refused to step into a house if there was a cat near a newborn. She didn't argue about it, she didn't explain it scientifically, she just believed it completely, like it was a fact of life. Another person said their entire family warned them the moment they announced a pregnancy. Get rid of the cat, they said. Don't take the risk. It wasn't said with anger. It was said with fear, the kind of fear that doesn't come from imagination, but from something that has been repeated so many times it starts to feel like truth. But then you start to see the modern stories, the ones that don't come from old traditions, but from people living right now. A young mother described waking up suddenly in the middle of the night. She didn't know why. There was no noise, no movement, nothing obviously wrong, but something felt off. The kind of feeling you can't explain, like your body knows something before your mind does. She turned toward the crib and froze. Her cat was inside it, sitting close to the baby's face, not touching, not attacking, just there, watching. She rushed over and pulled the cat away, her heart racing. The baby was fine, breathing normally, completely unaware of what had just happened. But the image stayed with her, the stillness of the cat, the silence of the room, the question that wouldn't go away. How long had it been there? Another person shared a similar experience. They said their cat had always loved warmth. It would sleep on laptops, blankets, even directly on top of them whenever it could. When they brought their newborn home, the cat became curious. Not aggressive, not hostile, just curious. It would hover around the crib, trying to climb in, looking for a comfortable place to settle. At first, it seemed harmless, even a little cute. But then one night, they noticed the cat had managed to get into the bassinet. It was curled up dangerously close to the baby's face. Nothing happened, but the realization hit instantly. If they hadn't checked, if they had slept a little longer, if things had shifted just slightly, the outcome could have been very different. These are the moments where the myth starts to change shape. It stops being about something mystical and starts becoming something physical, something grounded in reality. Because cats are drawn to warmth. It's instinct. They seek out the coziest spot in any environment. And a baby, small and warm and often smelling like milk, can become that spot without the cat understanding the danger. There is no intent to harm, no awareness of consequences, just instinct meeting vulnerability in the worst possible way. One of the most unsettling stories came from someone recalling their childhood. They said their family had a large, fluffy cat that loved sleeping on people. One night, their mother walked into the room and saw the cat lying across the baby's face. Not beside, not near, but directly across it. She immediately pulled the cat away, and the baby began to cry seconds later. Everything turned out fine, but the image never left her mind. The thought of what could have happened if she had come in a few minutes later. The silence before the cry. The stillness that could have meant something much worse. When you read enough of these stories, you start to notice a pattern. Not of something supernatural, but of something disturbingly simple. Cats seeking warmth, babies unable to move or push away, and adults who, in moments of exhaustion, aren't always able to monitor every second. It's not about evil, it's about a lack of awareness meeting a fragile situation. But then there are the darker stories, the ones that don't have clear endings, the ones that are told secondhand, passed from person to person without details, without proof, but with just enough consistency to make you pause. Someone mentions a baby in their town years ago. Another person said their relative swore it happened to someone they knew. The details are always vague, always incomplete, but the core is the same. A baby, a crib, a cat nearby, and a tragedy that no one fully explains. And in the absence of explanation, the myth steps in to fill the gap. Because it's easier to say a cat stole a baby's bath than to admit you don't know what happened. It's easier to assign blame to something visible than to accept uncertainty, especially in times when medical knowledge was limited, when conditions like sudden infant death syndrome weren't understood, when people were desperate for answers. If a baby died in its sleep and a cat was found nearby, the conclusion almost wrote itself. The cat must have done it. The cat must have taken something invisible, something essential, the breath. And once that idea takes hold, it spreads. It becomes a warning, a rule, a story told to protect others from experiencing the same pain. Even if the original assumption was wrong, the intention behind it remains. Keep the baby safe. Avoid the risk. Don't let the same thing happen again. Even today, the fear hasn't completely disappeared. Modern parents, armed with more knowledge and better understanding, still find themselves uneasy. A pregnant woman wrote about how her cat sleeps on her chest every night, purring softly, completely harmless. But as her due date approached, she couldn't shake the thought of what might happen when the baby arrived. Would the cat try to do the same thing? Would it climb into the crib, seeking that same warmth, that same comfort, without realizing the danger? She didn't believe the myth, not really, but the stories lingered in her mind, creating a quiet anxiety she couldn't ignore. Another parent said they refused to leave their cat and baby alone together, not because they thought the cat would do something intentional, but because they understood the risk of something accidental. That's the shift that has happened over time. The fear hasn't vanished, it has just evolved. It has moved from the supernatural to the practical, from the idea of breath being stolen to the reality of breath being blocked. And that's where the truth lies, not in myths or legends, but in simple, sometimes uncomfortable facts. Cats do not steal breath. They don't have the ability, the intent, or the understanding to do such a thing, but they can, in rare situations, create conditions where breathing becomes difficult for a baby. Not because they mean to, but because they don't know any better, because they are following instincts that have nothing to do with harm and everything to do with survival and comfort. That's why the safest approach has always been the simplest one: supervision, awareness, making sure that a baby has a clear, safe space to sleep without anything that could interfere with breathing. In the end, the cat isn't the villain of the story. It never was. It's just an animal, acting on instinct, unaware of the role it has been given in human fears and folklore. The real story is about us, about how we respond to the unknown, how we create explanations when none are available, and how those explanations can take on a life of their own. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones about monsters or hidden dangers. They're the ones that start with something ordinary, something familiar, something as simple as a quiet room, a sleeping baby, and a cat sitting nearby, doing nothing more than what comes naturally. And in that stillness, in that ordinary moment, the line between myth and reality becomes just thin enough to make you wonder.